the shadows we share together. I still remember the scent of his cologne lingering in the hallway. My husband Michael had a way of filling every room with his presence. Larger than life, charismatic, the kind of man you don't forget easily. But life has its cruel ways of reminding us how fragile everything is. His death was sudden. A car accident on a rainy night that snatched him away without warning. The weeks following his funeral were a haze of condolences, casseroles, and empty gestures. I moved through the house like a ghost, clinging to the remnants of him, the tie left on the armchair, the faint smell of his aftershave in the bathroom. It felt unbearable, yet I couldn't leave. This was the home we had built together, and leaving it would mean admitting he was truly gone. Alex, my 22-year-old stepson, handled his grief differently. He buried himself in work, in fixing things around the house, in being the strong one, but grief has a way of leaking through the cracks. Late at night, I'd hear his muffled sobs from his bedroom, and it broke my heart. One evening, a few months after the funeral, the storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside me. The rain hammered against the windows, and the power flickered out, plunging the house into darkness. I lit a few candles and found Alex in the living room, staring at an old photo of his father. "You okay?" I asked softly. He looked up, his eyes glassy. "I don't know how to do this without him." I sat beside him, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on his face. "Neither do I," I admitted. We talked that night, really talked, for the first time since the funeral. He shared memories of his dad, camping trips, life lessons, moments of laughter, and I shared mine. For the first time, it felt like we weren't drowning in our grief alone. As we spent more evenings like that, our connection deepened. It wasn't romantic, it couldn't be, but there was a warmth in his presence that began to thaw the icy loneliness in my chest. One night, as I was sorting through Michael's belongings, I found an old photo album. Flipping through it, I saw pictures of Alex as a little boy smiling with his father. The memories made me smile, and I decided to show him. I knocked on his door and found him sitting at his desk, headphones on. When he saw the album in my hands, he smiled. A real, genuine smile I hadn't seen in months. "Wow, where did you find this?" he asked, taking the album from me. "In the attic. Thought you might like to see it." We sat together on his bed, flipping through the pages. As we laughed at the awkward hairstyles and old outfits, I noticed how his hand brushed mine when he turned the pages. It was innocent, but it sent a shiver down my spine. The storm returned one night, the kind that rattled windows and made the power go out again. I was in the kitchen, lighting candles when Alex appeared. He looked tense, his hair damp from the rain he'd just come in from. "I hate storms," he muttered. "Me too," I said, offering him a glass of wine. We sat together in the dimly lit living room, the storm raging outside. The conversation drifted from his father to life, to how lonely we both felt. And then, without thinking, I reached out and touched his hand. "It's okay to feel lost," I said. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "I don't want to feel lost anymore." The kiss that followed wasn't planned. It was tentative, hesitant, but full of unspoken emotions. I pulled away, shocked by what had just happened. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my heart pounding. "Don't be," he said, his voice low and steady. That night changed everything. It wasn't just about physical intimacy. It was about finding solace in each other's arms, filling the void left by Michael's absence. We didn't talk about what it meant or where it would lead. We just existed in the moment. Two broken souls finding comfort in the dark. But in the light of day, reality set in. Questions loomed over us. What would people think? Was this right? Did it matter? The morning after, sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, casting golden patterns on the walls. I woke up tangled in the sheets, my heart heavy with confusion and guilt. The night before felt like a fever dream. A blur of emotions, grief, and a desperate need for connection. Alex was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his back to me. The muscles in his shoulders were tense, his head bowed as if he were trying to make sense of everything. I pulled the sheet around me and sat up slowly. "Alex," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned to me, his eyes soft yet conflicted. "I know what you're going to say, that it was a mistake." Was it? I couldn't decide. Every rational part of me screamed that it was wrong, but my heart, my broken, aching heart, felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "It wasn't planned. It wasn't expected." "But it wasn't meaningless," he interrupted, his tone firm. "You felt it too, didn't you? That connection." I couldn't deny it. "We're both grieving, Alex. Maybe that's all it was, a way to cope." "Maybe," he said, but there was doubt in his voice. We sat in silence, the weight of what had happened pressing down on us. Finally, I stood and gathered my clothes. "We need to figure this out, together." In the days that followed, we tried to act as though nothing had changed, but it had, irrevocably. There was a new tension between us, an unspoken understanding that hovered in the air. One evening, as I was making dinner, Alex walked into the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, watching me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "Can we talk?" he asked. I set down the knife and turned to him, crossing my arms. "About?" "Us." My stomach flipped at the word. "Alex." "Before you say anything," he interrupted, stepping closer, "I need you to know something. I felt this way about you for a long time. Long before Dad." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. I never acted on it because it wasn't right. "But now." "Now what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Now things are different. We're different. And I can't pretend I don't feel this anymore." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to push him away, to tell him this was ridiculous, but a part of me, the part that had felt alive in his arms that night, didn't want to. "I don't know if I can do this," I said honestly. "You don't have to decide now," he said softly. "Just think about it." That night, lying alone in my bed, my mind wandered to Michael. Our relationship had been solid, but not without its flaws. Michael had been a provider, protector, but not always the most attentive partner. I remembered our wedding night, the way he'd held me as if I were the most precious thing in the world. But as the years passed, that passion had faded. He became consumed with work, and our intimacy grew mechanical, routine. Then there was Alex. Young, attentive, and unguarded in his emotions. The contrast between them was stark, and it made me question everything. The next morning, I found Alex in the garden, fixing the old bench that had been Michael's favorite spot. He was shirtless, his skin glistening with sweat as he worked. My breath hitched at the sight, and I quickly looked away, cursing myself for the thoughts creeping into my mind. "You're up early," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, not looking up. "Thought I'd make myself useful." I nodded, lingering for a moment before retreating inside. But later, as I watched him through the window, I realized something. This wasn't just about grief or loneliness. I was drawn to him, undeniably and irrevocably. That evening, the tension between us reached a breaking point. It started with a simple touch, his hand brushing against mine as we reached for the same plate. Our eyes met and the air crackled with unspoken desire. "Alex, we can't," I began, but my words faltered as he stepped closer. "Tell me you don't feel this," he said, his voice low. I couldn't. Before I knew it, his lips were on mine, his hands gripping my waist as he pulled me closer. The kiss was hungry, desperate, and it ignited something in me that I hadn't felt in years. We stumbled to the couch, our movements frantic yet hesitant. It was as if we were both afraid this moment would vanish if we stopped. In the days that followed, we found ourselves navigating this uncharted territory. We were careful, cautious, and always looking over our shoulders. The world outside our home would never understand, and we weren't ready to face its judgment. But inside these walls, we found a semblance of peace, a fragile, tentative happiness that neither of us had expected. The weeks passed, and Alex and I settled into an unspoken rhythm. By day, we maintained the facade of a grieving family, each lost in our respective routines. By night, the barriers between us dissolved. It started innocently, sharing a glass of wine on the porch after dinner, laughing over old family photos. But those moments always seemed to escalate, a glance turning into a lingering touch, a quiet laugh giving way to soft murmurs and stolen kisses. The house became our haven, shielding us from the judgmental eyes of the outside world. But deep down, I knew this delicate arrangement couldn't last forever. One morning, as I was tidying up the living room, the doorbell rang. Startled, I opened it to find my sister-in-law, Karen, standing on the porch. "Karen," I said, forcing a smile. "This is a surprise." I was in the area and thought I'd check in on you two, she replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. Alex is out running errands, I lied, hoping to avoid any awkward encounters. She sat down on the couch, her posture rigid. How have you been holding up? Taking it one day at a time, I said, keeping my tone light. Karen wasn't convinced. You've seemed distant. Is everything okay between you and Alex? Her question caught me off guard. Of course, we're both just adjusting, that's all. She nodded, but didn't look satisfied. As the conversation dragged on, I found myself growing more anxious. Karen had always been perceptive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she sensed something was off. That evening, Alex returned home to find me pacing the kitchen. Karen stopped by, I blurted out before he could say anything. His brows furrowed. Did she suspect anything? I don't know, I admitted, but we need to be more careful. Alex stepped closer, his hands resting on my shoulders. We've been careful, Rachel. No one knows. And no one will, as long as we keep it that way. His confidence should have reassured me, but it didn't. The guilt of what we were doing was beginning to weigh on me. She nodded, but didn't look satisfied. As the conversation dragged on, I found myself growing more anxious. Karen had always been perceptive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she sensed something was off. That evening, Alex returned home to find me pacing the kitchen. Karen stopped by, I blurted out before he could say anything, his brows furrowed. Did she suspect anything? I don't know, I admitted, but we need to be more careful. Alex stepped closer, his hands resting on my shoulders. We've been careful, Rachel. No one knows, and no one will, as long as we keep it that way. His confidence should have reassured me, but it didn't. The guilt of what we were doing was beginning to weigh on me. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. Memories of Michael flooded back, the way he used to hold me, the laughter we shared, the life we had built together. But alongside those memories came thoughts of Alex. The way he made me feel alive again, the way his touch could set my skin on fire. I was torn between the past and the present, between what was right and what felt impossible to deny. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder and second-guessing myself. I needed clarity, and the only way to find it was to confront my feelings head-on. Alex, I said that evening as we sat down for dinner. We need to talk. He set down his fork, his expression guarded. That sounds serious. It is, I admitted. Whatever it is between us, it can't keep going like this. We need to decide what we want and what we're willing to risk. Alex leaned back in his chair, studying me. What do you want, Rachel? I don't know, I said honestly, but I can't keep living in limbo. We need to figure out if this is something real or if it's just what? He pressed. Just a way to fill the void, I finished, my voice barely above a whisper. That night, as we sat on the porch under the stars, Alex opened up in a way he never had before. Rachel, I've been in love with you for years, he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. Even when I knew it was wrong, even when I tried to push it down, I couldn't stop. And now that we've crossed this line, I don't want to go back. His words left me speechless. I had always assumed his feelings were fleeting, a product of grief and proximity. But hearing him say it so plainly, so earnestly, changed everything. I need time to think, I said finally, my heart aching with the weight of his confession. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reevaluating everything. My marriage to Michael, my feelings for Alex, my own sense of right and wrong. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch, Alex joined me. Have you decided? He asked, his voice quiet. I looked at him, my heart pounding. I don't know what the future holds, Alex, but I do know one thing. I don't want to lose you. His hand found mine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Months later, we decided to leave the small town behind and start fresh in a new city. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only way to escape the judgment and whispers that would inevitably follow us. As we settled into our new life, I realized that love doesn't always fit into neat, socially acceptable boxes. Sometimes, it's messy and complicated, but that doesn't make it any less real. And as Alex and I faced the world together, I knew we were ready to fight for what we had, no matter what.